Here we go. Always good to know when the recording starts. Hello, welcome back to another live taped, whatever this is. It's me, Sam, your pop archivist, and I am back with another amazing and special guest. He is the most historical of archivists, the most cartoony as well. Please welcome Burkely Hermann. Hello. How are you doing, sir?
Pretty good.
Yay. We've been Twitter friends for a little bit, and both kind of in the same circles of writing about pop culture depictions of the archival, or in some cases the library side of things, just kind of pointing out that, hey, there's a lot of these out there. You just don't really notice them or see how many there are in actuality. So for those who don't maybe know your work, Burkely, could you maybe give them like a little summary, little introduction?
Um, I think I started writing maybe sometime in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
I think I started writing about archives thanks to your blog. That
Oh,
sort of inspired me to
yeah.
like, but I think I had one for about libraries now called Pop Culture Library Review. Um, and then I decided I should do one for archives too.
Mm-hmm.
So um, I've mainly focused on animation because that's just what I like watching and what I'm
Yeah.
interested in. So, and a lot of people have done stuff on movies and stuff. So I wanted to cover a different subject with my blog.
Yeah, no, movies are always like the easiest one to cover just because they're more visible. They're a lot easier to get access to. But then when you open up the scope, it's just kind of like there's so much more. And like you're saying, animation actually lends itself to the archives quite a lot.
Mhm.
I think between the two of us, we have covered a vast array of cartoon episodes
Yeah,
because,
definitely.
yeah, there's so many shows out there, and they all seem to at some point have an episode in which the main characters go to either a library or an archives of some sort for whatever the reason. It doesn't even have to pertain to the story necessarily. It's just, hey kids, we're going to go on a fun trip to this place you probably don't want to go to. So, and it's kind of interesting to see like how far this expands, because the way we're going to do this, which we talked about before we started recording, is kind of go back and forth. There will be overlap, obviously, but like
Mhm.
I feel like the oldest one that we have on here is mine, and I think that's where we're going to start, is
Okay.
with the Smurfs and the Archives of Evil, which is the actual name of the episode. it's it's from like 1980 something or whatever, which, it's the 80s. What are you going to do? It's Smurfs. Um, I think I'm a bit older than you, so I remember watching the Smurfs. I do not remember this episode. I watched this on a website that you could watch it on. So, but it was like in the midst of me searching for stuff, I was like, wait, the Smurfs, okay. And then the title card for the archive, it just says Archives of Evil, and then below are like two Smurfs just like hanging out, and it's like, this is the most incongruous. It's so good. And as a basic, like, because each show, like, it's going to be impossible to like recap everything that's necessary for all of these episodes. So the long and short of it is, because this is an 80s cartoon, it's also really cut and dry, straightforward. There's an archives in the basement of a library,
Mhm.
like you do. And it's full of evil magic, and there's a wizard that wants to get access to it, and in order to do so, shenanigans must ensue, and then the Smurfs, for reasons I don't remember, stop it from happening. it's it's really just kind of a, okay, we needed an idea for an episode, here we go. Papa Smurf doing stuff. And there's like, I think a witch is like the either she's the librarian or she's the secretary for the library, or like at the admin desk. Who knows? God forbid they label anyone at this point. But yeah, it's just kind of like sneaky wizard tries to get into evil archives, gets access to an book, and then gets stopped by Smurfs. That's essentially the episode. So, but yeah. Yeah, that's the long and short of it. So I mean, it doesn't say much other than it's kind of like some of those tropes that we tend to start seeing as more cartoons are going to be popping up in this list, where it's an archives that's just kind of there. There's no real archivist, unless there are cases where there is an archivist, and we will talk about them. But in this case, it's just another location, and it has no impact on a major plot, because this is also the 80s, and like meta narratives didn't really exist in the cartoons at this point. There was no like long story arcs that were happening with the Smurfs, which I guess would have been interesting if that had actually formed. But yeah, so let's put it over to you, Berkeley. What's your pick? What's your first one you want to start off with?
I guess like the first animation that I really saw, like I guess you could call it an archives. I mean, but it's like a superhero series called Stretch Armstrong and the Flex Fighters. Okay. Anyway, there's I don't know how I found it or whatever. Well, anyway.
I remember playing with a Stretch Armstrong as a kid.
So there's like this one grandfather of one of the characters who has like a newspaper archive, so he calls it, in his basement. But he's not really an archivist. He's like a former reporter or something. And it's just like a bunch of stacked newspapers. They're supposedly organized. But he's like the first person that said like, oh, well, I'm not a pack rat. I'm an archivist or something. Oh. So that was like the first one I came across. So
you gotta love it when they're just kind of like, no, I'm not a hoarder. I'm an archivist. It's different. Yeah. Like, not in this context. No. There's a video game, Sherlock Holmes, Crimes and Punishment, and basically Sherlock's archives are a bunch of newspapers stacked near the fireplace. It's like, you have a bunch of loose papers near an open flame. Like, I thought you were supposed to be smart, Sherlock. What is happening here? But yeah, Stretch Armstrong, interesting topic of cartoon show, first of all, and then a news reporter just stacking his papers, being like, yeah, this is totally my archives. I'm sticking to that story.
I mean, it's funny because it actually does become important later, because somehow like the internet or these like online databases get taken down, so they have to like go there and like use the newspapers to find out what they. But for some reason, even though like some of the villains know it's there, they don't do anything. Like they don't try to destroy the newspapers or anything. So I don't know what it's.
Is it like a lesson on the dangers of digital versus analog or something like that? Or like,
yes,
you can't just rely on digital.
Right.
Sometimes it's the old school process that saves the day, which, I mean, they're not wrong. Sometimes it does become the physical, like hard copy, older stuff that does save the day. But I don't know, that seems kind of, that might be too stretched too far for a cartoon show like this. But yeah. Especially when it's an IP based on a toy that you just literally, draw and quarter. So okay, so there's that. I think I'm going to cross this off so I remember what I actually talked about. Okay. I think the next one I want to do. Ooh, I have choices now. I have too many choices. I want to do Voltron. So okay. Voltron, Legendary Defender. which was a reimagined, I don't know if you want to say remake or reboot of the Voltron franchise. I think over at Cartoon Network or Netflix or something like that, which was very popular for a long time until they really started going away, that the fans were like, this doesn't feel good. So at some point in Voltron, the main villain, Zarkon, is supposedly dead. I think he dies a couple of times in the course of the series, but the first time he's technically dead. The Galra, which is the race of baddie aliens that we're up against, they call what they call a Kral Zera, which is also the name of the episode. And it's basically going like, hey, our king is dead. Now we got to choose a new ruler. And the way we do that is a bunch of you climb up these steps and then I guess challenge each other to light a flame here, kind of like an Olympic torch ceremony. And it's all, the impetus behind it is a call from the archivist. And they have no name. They are just the title of archivist. They have maybe like, I want to say one big speechify thing that they do to kind of explain why everyone's here so that the audience knows what's happening. And then they're kind of just there. They're like off to the side for a bit. They don't do anything else. They're just there for that. And that's all we hear from them until I think like maybe 2 or 3 seasons later, where they show up in an episode and then are killed. Like that's, you see them and then they are just killed right on camera. You're like, well, okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's one of my, it's not great, but it's also like hilarious to me that that's their whole purpose for being there, is like, oh, it's the archivist. Yeah, dead. But runs into another trope that we start running into as well, where it's the archivist is a character in title only. Like they are there to facilitate a thing happening. They have no real name. They don't have like really a personality beyond that they are just the archivist and whatever that means to whoever is creating them. And I think the only purpose behind this particular character, because quite frankly, you could have put anyone in this position. Like it didn't have to be a person titled the archivist. It could have just been the Grand Inquisitor or the librarian. I mean, the title is whatever. It is non-functioning. It doesn't serve any purpose other than to maybe kind of do a shorthand for that the Galra have a long traditional history, and that just having an archivist implies something that has a longer history. So you don't have to do a lot of like, hey, let's go through the entire backstory of the Galra Empire. No, they have an archivist. They probably have a lot of history we don't know about. So, but yeah, did you ever watch Voltron?
I have heard of it and I've read about it, but I've not watched.
There you go. No, I mean, fair enough. I was in and out of it and then kind of watched all the rest. I remember when I was a kid, like the original Voltron being on television, or we rented it from a video store or something like that. But yeah, this reimagining had some interesting like reimaginings that they did, and then some stuff where it's just kind of like, man, you guys could have stuck the landing, but you did not stick to your guns. So good on you. But it's still just kind of one of those cases of these particular types of tropes kind of cropping up and showing that the writers are, I don't know, it's kind of like they're thinking about like a cultural aspect, but they also aren't providing any other information than like, okay, an archivist, we've done our work, let's go. How about we move on to your next pick there, Burkely?
Okay. Let's see. Oh, I think we both watched this one, but we've watched Hilda, which I I've almost finished rewatching all of it.
Yeah.
but I don't know why not.
Yeah, I mean,
But
the only one I've seen is the one episode, the Tide Mice, in terms of how archives and everything. I haven't caught up on the later seasons
okay.
of Hilda, so I will also be coming into this new.
Well, the only thing I was going to say about that is in rewatching it, because sometimes I think you gain something from rewatching a series that you didn't get the first time. And I didn't realize how much records are such a, maybe not a big part, but an important part of the whole series. Like they have this whole thing with Alfred being this elf who
Mhm.
you can only see the elves unless you fill out this paperwork.
Uh,
Unless you don't fill out the paperwork, like you can't see them. So there's this whole like thing going on with that. And he's always taking notes like the whole time of all the adventures and everything. So
mhm.
that's kind of an interesting.
Yeah, I didn't think about that. That yeah,
Yeah.
the first, like basically in the first episode, she has to fill out a whole like permission
Yeah.
slip to even look at the elves.
Yeah, its answer to everything is just like bureaucratic. Like they go through this whole like bureaucratic thing of like, oh, you have to talk to like you go to the prime minister, but like, oh, I don't have the authorities. Then you have to like talk to this other person to fill out a paperwork and like go through all these hoops. Like,
Yep.
and then at the very end, the guy's like, oh, well, I can't really do anything. It's like, the prime minister, like, it's out of my hands. Like, wait, like you're the last person.
That's what we call satire.
Yeah.
I'm just an elected official. I can't do anything.
Right.
Yeah, it's kind of when I talked to Jennifer about Star Wars in a previous episode, I made a point to point out, like, A New Hope, the first Star Wars movie, starts with information management. Basically, it's like we're moving a piece of data to another repository, essentially. Like that's the beginning of Star Wars. Yep. And no one ever talks about it that way. And Hilda is very much the same thing. It starts with records management and filling out the untold story of Hilda. Right. Yeah, because in the first episode that deals with, I guess, what you would call an archives, in a generous sense, is the Tide Mice. And that's where I think Hilda and her, I forget her friend, the little girl, but they go, huh? Frida. Oh yeah, okay.
Her and Frida go. Then there's her like pet deer fox thing. Twig.
Yeah. And then there's the kid. There's the little boy, because she's got the boy and the girl. Who?
David.
Okay. Yeah. David, Frida, and Hilda. Okay. I'll see if I can remember that. Yeah. But they go to the library, and there's a librarian who is also a witch, and she's got the cape to prove it. In that episode, she is unnamed, but Hilda sneaks into kind of like the special collections area, which is where all the spell books are, which I think is the perfect, like, why aren't more libraries of spell books in places, like, not just in like your HP whatever, but it's just like an actual like archive of spell books would be amazing to me. But that's an idea for another day. But she sneaks into like a special collections where it's all like the magic books, and finds a book to help David, I think, with his stage fright, I believe is the whole thing, which requires calling on these Tide Mice to basically like take that fear away. But then there's unforeseen consequences, and she does it on her mom too, because Hilda's got some like questionable morality at times.
Yeah.
It's like,
well, I was just going to add in that like the big I guess one of the points of the episode that the elf brings up, that like you didn't read the footnotes. Like they go into this whole thing of like, oh, it's a footnote, and then you have to like read the asterisk to the footnote, and then it's like a footnote to the like, and like you have to read it in this like tiny little magnifying glass. Like,
for between the two of us, I'm sure we can appreciate that, given the amount of books and articles we've had to read over the course of getting degrees that require so many footnotes to either be written or referenced. It's like, did you ever read the book Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell? It's a really good, if you're into the style of kind of like your Jane Austens and your Brontes and everything, it's in that style of writing, but it makes really good use of footnotes and actually is telling you much more of the story and filling in some of the gaps through those footnotes. It took me a very long time to get into it because I'm not the biggest Jane Austen or Bronte, reader. But once I got into the book, I was like, oh yeah, these footnotes are amazing. And look at what they're doing. They're telling the story too. But I can appreciate that about Hilda as well, that it's not just paperwork, but it's also the fine print and the footnotes.
Yes.
So you've seen the episodes afterwards, because I do know that the librarian gets a name eventually, right?
Not gonna reveal that.
Why not? Why didn't you get to tell me her name?
I don't know.
That's the whole point of this.
I'm just gonna say that it's interesting how they chose the name, like that it fits with the voice actress must have been happy to choose the
I can do it. Spoiler alert.
Okay.
We're gonna do this.
Okay.
I should have done it at the top of this with spoilers for a lot of cartoon episodes.
Okay.
All right, now you tell me. Everyone go away.
So the voice actress is named Kaisa Hemmerl. I'm not going to say that anyway. Okay. And so the librarian is named Kaisa after the voice actress.
Oh, that's just sweet. Like intentional or no, which it probably would have to be.
I think it was. They're probably like, you want to voice a character named Kaisa that will be revealed later in the series? This guy's like, sure, whatever. Like,
yeah, why not? It's like, it's too uncommon of a name, at least to my ears, for it to not be, intentional.
Yeah, and I think this is her first.
I want
to say it's her first voiceover. I mean, I think she does like plays and stuff or something. I don't know. It's on her website or something. I haven't looked, but I think it's her first animated
research, Burkely.
Yeah, I think it's her first animated I don't know, role or something.
Yeah. Well, that's cool that the show would like give her that, because it's kind of, I don't know, it in a way it's like it's very much like honoring her and just being like, we like you enough, and also we're just going to name the character after you because you have a cool name. Why not? But yeah, she gets a slightly bigger role as the series progresses. Just at the very least, she's named. And does she develop a personality?
Yeah, and she also appears, and there was a movie that came out in last year, I think. I don't know. Hilda and the Mountain King, and she has like a role in it for about I don't know. I want to say it's like a scene in maybe about a minute long. Okay. It's not very long. Apparently, they were going to give her a longer scene. They decided against it. Whatever, but.
Yeah, everyone's got to do research at some point, and they need to go to a library for a reason. So you might as well already have a character ready to go, which we find with a lot of these TV series. Like they either have an archivist that they've previously like established, or a librarian of some sort, or we just forego that and just assume that people are on break whenever the main characters show up. Which I think will kind of dovetail nicely into, let's talk about Amphibia. Okay. Because that's one that you and I have both done reviews for. I think I held off on doing Amphibia for the longest time because you had done your review and I didn't. It's that weird thing where it's like, because there are so few of us writing about these kinds of things, I didn't want to step on anyone's toes. I was like, it's like Burkely has his. If I do that, I don't want it to be like a comparison of reviews, but I still want to talk about this episode. So so Amphibia, which is a beautiful, gorgeous show, and everyone should watch it. It's entirely finished. Like it was 3 seasons, and the finale is like pitch perfect. It's just the most beautiful story that has frogs in it, and salamanders and toads and whatever. But the kind of the basic premise is that this girl, Anne Bonchui, played by Brenda Song, and you'll see you'll notice, people, the ones that I've paid the most attention to, I have far more information about in terms of like voice cast and plot summary. But she and two of her friends get trapped in the world of Amphibia after a birthday oriented heist goes wrong with a little special music box. And so Anne is transported to this little town in Amphibia called, was it Wurtzville, something like that?
Wurtwood,
Wurtwood, yeah, something with
something
frogs.
Like that.
it's all amphibian based. You get it, puns. And so this is in the first season, so as the plot is progressing, they realize they have to go and do some research as they're going to like the main city to talk with like the king, I think is the kind of the point. And along the way, they go to the Wurtwood the Wurtwood archives, which basically like they go in, and I have this up on the website, and it's just like this huge like room with books everywhere, and you see a couple of like artifacts, but no archivist, poorly lit. And one of the things that I loved, well, not loved, but at the beginning, before they even go into the archives, is so Anne is basically a part of this little family with Hop Pop, the grandfather, and his grandchildren Sprig and Polly. And Sprig basically ends up becoming like Anne's best friend. So Sprig is just like, what's an archives? And because he's already bored out of his mind. He wants to just do things and get things done and everything. Classic prepubescent teenage boy kind of attitude. And Anne is like, oh, we have these in my world, but they're called libraries. And that was the point where I was like, no, Anne, they're not something that alien worlds have.
Right.
They're a thing that are very real in yours as well. I was like, okay, oh, you were so close. You were so close. Like I appreciate though that even like in the title of the episode, it's a trip to the archives, that it's like, this is where we are, this is the area we're going to be in, and then like basically the whole story is how do they escape from the archives, because they get trapped in there because no one actually works in the archives. There's a timed like crystal that when the sun goes down, the light will move away from the door essentially. And so once it's gone, the door closes and locks until the sun comes up the next day, which is an imperfect system for this very reason.
Yeah.
What were your impressions of the episode, Burkely?
Yeah, I think some of the same things that you were saying, but also I think there was a line at the beginning that like, oh, the archives is something like dustier than Dusty's dustbin or something. So like,
oh yeah,
that whole idea that like the archives is like this dusty, unorganized place. Of course, it's in like, underground. Apparently, I think no one had been there for like 3 years or something. So like no one even really visits.
Yeah, and it's so far off the beaten path too. Like it's not close to the town at all. They've seemed to have traveled quite a ways to even get to it.
Yeah.
Like, okay. Because yeah, it's like they're there to do research. And for an archives, it has much more of a resemblance to a library than it does an actual archives. There's also like weaponry, like artifacts kind of strewn about that Polly is really into, like, because she's a sword girl, and I appreciate that. I really do. And then I think Sprig accidentally set some stuff on fire. I think the only positive thing I can say about the use of the archives is that they use all the stuff to create their Jacob's ladder, or their escape method out of the archives to get like Anne up. That's pretty much the only good use that comes of the archives at that point, because I don't think that I'm trying to remember if they find anything that's actually important to their journey. And I can't recall if they did.
I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't remember. I
Yeah.
mean, I thought they find like a blueprint to their house or something. I don't know,
Oh,
but I don't know if they ever used that.
that might be true. Oh, no, it is because like the plumbing
Okay,
system, I think that
right.
because it's not Anne, it's Sprig because he's small enough. So they get him to go through the pipes basically. Get him out. Yeah, and then I for some reason I want to say that they find something about the music box, but I could also be wrong, and that comes at some later date. But yeah, so it's a short. I mean, it's as most of these episodes are for a lot of these shows, especially with Disney Channel. You get like short 15-minute like segments or 11-minute segments depending on
Yeah.
commercials. So it's a short and sweet story. It accomplishes some things. It's mostly like a lot of like character establishing moments too, with like Sprig and Polly and Hop Pop and Anne. But I mean, and there's nothing wrong with those, like these kinds of like bottle episodes. It would have been nice if there was like an archivist that they could have talked to, but then you get into that weird territory of you want to make sure that your protagonists are active. And if you put them in a situation where they have an archivist to rely on to get them the things that they need, then they are seen as passive, and therefore it's not as interesting. Which I would disagree. I feel like, especially an episode that we'll talk about later when we get to like DuckTales, you can actually have an archivist character and progress the plot and still make it interesting. But that's for a little bit later. That's the tour de grace. But yeah, anything else you want to say about Amphibia before we move on?
I mean, other than just well, I mean, we already talked about it, but like the archives, library confusion.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a whole tag on my website, just I mean, on my blog, just like archive library confusion.
Yeah.
Anytime it comes up.
I think my tag is like libraries and archives are not synonymous. It's a much longer tag, but yeah, it comes up a lot. Okay, so it's your turn. You get to pick now.
I have.
Make it good.
We already did Hilda. Have you watched that much Steven Universe?
Oh yeah, I love Steven Universe.
Okay, good. It's funny because when I learned about that from, I don't know, I still go on Reddit every so often. Anyway, I go on there, but they like, I think I was watching She-Ra, the new She-Ra, and I don't know, there was some conversation. Someone said, "Oh yeah, but Steven Universe has better representation than She-Ra," and I was like, "Okay, I don't know if that's totally true, but I don't think it's true." But the fact so then that's kind of how I got into watching all of that, and then I recently rewatched it, and there's a lot of records, sort of archives, somewhat.
Yeah.
I don't know, sometimes throughout
there's definitely I have a section of like my master list of things to eventually like write about, talk about, and on one of them it's just basically going like an are they an archivist kind of section, and Pearl is on there for me, just because there's a lot of historical knowledge that she possesses, that she keeps in her gem, obviously, and she herself represents kind of like an archival, personality, like how she goes about like storing things and holding on to memories and whatnot. So I haven't gotten to her yet, but I feel like there's a good case to be made for Pearl as an archivist.
Yeah, I had written a whole post about Peridot, who comes in, and she's like making logs of all of these things that are happening. And then of course they she has some like limb enhancements or something, and they throw those into the water, so that like ends up like disrupting her the records that she has, and so she's not
Yeah.
happy about that. So there's like all this like record loss there. So that she has to like go to this like place where all these gems are made, the
Oh, is that
so-called
like the kindergarten?
the prime kindergarten.
Yeah.
And I mean, she's basically like the size of like a kindergartner. I mean, so
Shorty squad.
yeah, so she has like all this information sort of backed up there, which comes just helpful later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Peridot is an interesting character. Like when they added her into the lineup of main characters and everything, because she came across as so scathing and unlikable, and then for them to really just make her the most adorable little curmudgeon. I mean, and then yeah, just like the records aspect of her, where she's just constantly keeping logs on her tape recorder, or it was like a recorder, and then I think she was actually just using an old like analog like cassette tape recorder when she was stuck.
She was, but then when Lapis was angry, she like crunched it.
Oh yeah.
So like I don't know what happened to that's like what I wrote about. I was like, what happened to like all those like recordings? Like they're all gone now. They're all like you can't like access any of them, So
Peridot's like records are just destined to be destroyed by someone in a fit of anger. I have to believe she made some attempt to back it up, because she feels like that kind of a personality that she would. But there's the canon of the show, and then there's the head canon of you or I.
Well, it's funny because that gets turned into like they make these like I was thinking about it the other day, like they're like modern art, abstract art of like Lapis and these like so-called meat morphs.
Oh yeah.
And so like one of those is like the tape recorder called Miscommunication, and like the tape is like wrapped around.
It's true art.
So
it's like archives can take a page out of the meat morph mentality and just have like one of those things, which is an amalgamation of stuff. And it's like archives.
Yeah, it's like here's a leaf that Stephen gave me, when like the first leaf, and it's just like a leaf, like okay, like I don't know, like
I kind of, I don't know, it's you can kind of make that interpretation of her recording every like vital moment in her life, basically. Like she was all about serving the diamonds and making note of her accomplishments to further her station. And then now it's like, I want to commemorate these important like emotional moments and facets of my new life. And Stephen gave me this leaf, and I have unexamined feelings for Lapis, and and everyone can see that, but me, really. So it's interesting, like how Peridot and Pearl, who are also at kind of clash a lot in terms of how they approach things, are both kind of representative of aspects of record keeping and history and memory. Like you could look at Peridot and be much more of the like present tense, like immediacy of record keeping for posterity's sake, whereas Pearl is much more of the like holding on to memories for her own personal use, and personal need. But then also that those memories can be skewed by her biases and her personality and attitude and everything. So I feel like there's so much more now I need to be like looking at Steven Universe. So
well, and there was also one I did, I think, or maybe it's scheduled. I know I scheduled a bunch of posts, but anyway, one of them, it was about, maybe I posted, I don't remember, I can look it up. But anyway, there's one about, okay, yeah, it's scheduled. So, so it's about Lapis, Lazuli, and she's trapped in this mirror. And I was talking about that and how she's freed from this mirror and all that. And she was inside of Pearl's Pearl or whatever.
Yeah, she was in the
Anyway,
storage
so
pearl.
she was inside the storage, like the surface pearl, and then there's like the lower pearls. Anyway, so I just wrote all about that and like how some people would think like, oh, because it's a mirror, it should be really in an archive and stored. And I was like, well, if that was the case, then like she never would have like got out and like,
Yeah.
you know, been freed and been angry at all the other people for not like freeing her or anything for all these years and just keeping her there. They didn't really know what to do with her. And then they just kind of, she's basically imprisoned in this mirror for like thousands of years. And
Yeah.
that
They
does
basically
not
forgot
make her
about her.
happy. Like of course, and so of course she sees Steven as like this great, you know, that he's like, yay, like you fixed my gem, you know, you engaged in some conservation, you fixed my
Yeah,
gem and
Steven
made me a
does
whole
engage in
person.
conservation.
Yeah. But the other gems, no, they didn't try to help me at all. Like
No, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of it that way, that Steven, through his magical spit, can actually engage in conservation. Not the best way to approach preservation conservation, but I mean, in this world and in this context, it actually gets the job done.
Yeah.
He restored memory. He restored herself to who she was before they imprisoned her in the mirror. Which, yep. I mean, you could make also a case for like the storage of artifacts of like during a war, and you know, because the crystal gems, especially like over the course of Steven Universe, the more you start learning about them, and the more you start learning, especially about Steven's mom, Rose Quartz, you're just like, oh no, this is like, ooh, this is getting into some sketchy areas. And I feel like when Lapis is first introduced, I mean, just thinking this through, like based on like what you're even saying about, you know, the mirror and everything, like it's kind of your first real inkling with how Lapis was basically stored away and like damaged by the crystal gems and forgotten about until Steven frees her.
Right.
That, yeah, this is a huge like war crime practically. So yeah, there's a lot to, I mean, this is one of the things that I like about especially modern cartoons is because my sister and I were talking about this, because I have a nephew who's 6 now, and you look at the cartoons that, you know, my sister and I were exposed to back in like the late 80s, early 90s, and going forward. And then what he's kind of been more exposed to, like there's just so much more storytelling happening in modern cartoons, because they kind of, these are people who grew up in the same era that I did and are now making the cartoons. And they're like, no, kids can absolutely track a storyline, and you can talk about, you know, heavy subjects, but you can still make it entertaining, and you can still show what the lessons are to be had from them. And I think that Steven Universe and Amphibia and Owl House even have done a really spectacular job of, and I think even Adventure Time to a certain degree, have done a really good job of not dumbing down their storytelling for the audience. They're just like, no, kids will understand, they will get it. And it's on the parents to kind of help with explaining that, whereas the cartoon is like, I've laid it out for you. You can follow the journey here, but I'm not going to do this to make you feel stupid, which I appreciate. And as an adult enjoying these cartoons, I can be like, I see what you did. I understood that reference. Okay, so that's Steven Universe. Anything else you want to say about Steven?
Well, the only other things I was going to say is that like I guess we could call it like analog technology, like videotapes and things, is a big part of the series. Where, I mean, you know, he has like throughout the series, Steven has like a TV with a VHS player. I mean, I don't know how many people have that anymore. I don't have it anymore. But so yeah, he has that, and like his mother left behind like a VHS tape inside of like his pet lion for I don't know how many long. Apparently the videotape still works.
Yep.
I don't know, whatever. It still works like after all that time.
It's magic.
Uh,
It's magic
well,
crystal tech.
I mean, I point out that like that it actually was probably stored better inside of his lion than when it's in his house, was like he has it stored like the wrong way. It's like, do you want this videotape to not work? Like you're storing it wrong.
Well, if you consider Lion, the portal to the world inside Lion's mane has no oxygen. So it actually, the tape was better preserved there because it wouldn't be subject to degradation. So technically, Lion's main storage area is actually better suited for archival preservation.
Yep.
I'm glad we've established this. We'll have to like further examine it. But yeah, no, you are right. Like the amount of VHS tapes that are present in the series, because not only did Steven's mom leave behind a tape for Steven, and also when they assumed maybe she might, Steven might be a girl, they had, I don't remember what the name was they were going to call him as a girl, but Nora. They left a is it Laura?
Nora.
Oh, okay. So you have a duplicate tape, and that's great. But then I think there's an episode where it's like Steven's dad, Greg, and what's her name? Amethyst are watching like old episodes of a TV series that they both like really bonded over right before Rose died, essentially. And like the whole episode is them just like coming back to what they had bonded initially over. And then it also kind of comes to a head with Amethyst being pissed at Greg for taking Rose away from them in the literal and figurative sense. So it's about a TV show, but it's really about feelings. So but yeah, it's all on VHS and they're just watching it on a TV. So. But yeah. All right, now I got more to think about, so thank you. Now gonna keep me up all night. Okay, so we've done Steven Universe. I think, I mean, you mentioned it before. Let's get into She-Ra.
Okay.
So She-Ra and the Princesses of Power, which is a remake of the old 80s series, or reimagining. I don't really want to use remake because it's the original series is what it is. And then this is just kind of like, let's do another version of that. So I think reimagining is probably a better use of our time. But yeah, this is a much more modern storytelling of She-Ra and Adora. It's a coming of age story. It's a queer narrative. It's about, children as part of a war. I mean, it's like, good God, there's a lot of PTSD running around. But it's handled well. Every show has their hiccups here and there, and She-Ra is not without its faults and flaws, but overall the narrative is pretty solid. And in one particular episode that I highlighted, we have Bo, who his main weapon is a bow, which gotta love it. Like that's 80s storytelling for you. We have this guy with a bow and arrow. What shall we name him?
Bo.
Which is, I mean, because She-Ra came after He-Man, and He-Man was very much in that same mentality of like, let's just name them the thing that they do or what they are. Like Man-at-Arms has a lot of arms, and so it's like, okay, whatever. But you see that naming convention a lot in She-Ra as well. So Bo, we find out, has been moonlighting essentially as a hero, because his full-time job seems to be helping his fathers run their museum / library / archives about the history of the ancient ones, the first ones, whichever one you want to call it. So it's kind of like that reverse narrative of the kid who runs off, like his family wants him to join the military, but he wants to be a librarian or whatever. They reverse that narrative, and it's my fathers, who are both historians, wanted me to be a historian, but no, I want to be a rebellion instigator. Which, fair play.
Yeah.
But yeah, he takes Adora and Glimmer to meet him. Well, no, Glimmer and Adora follow him because he's being sketchy. And they're like, oh no, he might be in trouble. We have to go save him. And they just realize, oh no, he just has a secret family we didn't know about. And it's adorable because his fathers are cute and very much in love. And one of them, oh God, I remember that one father is named Lance because they went with the weapon naming convention. And I forgot his other father's name. But he's the one that looks like the original Bo from the original She-Ra cartoon with the mustache and everything. It's like Lance and I want to say Gary, but that doesn't seem right. I feel like it's not that.
George.
Is it George?
George, yeah.
It's George? Oh, okay. Lance and see, Gary was close. Yeah. I was almost there. So George looks like original Bo from the 80s She-Ra, which I thought was a really nice callback to that. And he's got the first one's tattoo because Adora can naturally read the language of the first one. And he gets it and he thinks it says like love or beauty or whatever, and she's like, no, it means sandwich. But again, I love those little like cultural callbacks to things, like where it's like the person who gets a kanji tattoo and they're like, no, it means water and peace and love, and someone who actually can read kanji and knows the language is just kind of like, that's not what it says. What were your impressions of She-Ra and their records-based episodes?
I mean, I think it is sort of like a mix of the archives, a museum, and the library all in one. I think officially they call it like, the characters refer to it as a library, but yeah, it has all aspects of all three. So
yeah, it's what we run into in literally all of these cartoons is half the time you just have to go with the fact that they say library and they mean archives, or they say archives and they mean library, or they mean all of them and they just need a word. Basically what it boils down to, because I don't know, like I always kind of run into this issue as well, and I don't know if you do either, but you can't expect people to know everything about what they're writing about. Like it's, they need the convenience of a plot point, they need a place to have a thing take place, and if you're trying to talk about history and the importance of it, or why getting involved in a rebellion is actually the right thing to do in this case, versus your dad's telling you, no, you must keep your head in the sand and be a historian because that's what they do, then yeah, I understand utilizing a thing that you might be sort of aware of. Like libraries are more common to reference. You use archives when you want to kind of maybe stress something is older than a library. And then a museum is kind of like this weird kind of middle ground where, you want to still show artifacts, but it's not a traditional museum. So people got to be able to pick stuff up. You can't do that in a museum.
Yeah.
So, at least not like the regular ones, unless it's like a children's museum where you're just like slapping everything. But so it's always one of those things where it's like, you want to be critical of what they're showcasing and what it says about the archives in terms of like how they're talking about it, or what they choose to show and what they don't. But at the same time, they are not responsible for the education of people on the archival profession. Whereas on the other hand, they are also exacerbating the stereotypes that we are constantly talking about because they didn't know, or they didn't bother to do the research because they probably were on a crunch and had to write an episode. So I don't know. What do those thoughts plague you as much as they do me sometimes?
Yeah, sometimes. It's also interesting sometimes that like In some of the cases, like you'll have the same writers. You're like, oh, look who wrote this episode. Oh, wait, this is the same person that wrote that episode that also had a stereotype in it, like years earlier. Like, I guess they didn't learn. I don't know. No one told them. So, like,
like, what librarian hurt you?
I know.
Yeah, it's a weird place to be, where you want someone. I had this with like Critical Role for the longest time, before I just had to kind of like let it go. It's just like, they're not responsible for teaching people about what an archives is and isn't. They've created an archives within their world of D&D, and they're basing it off of whatever rules they're going on. The problem is they have an audience of hundreds of thousands, and I have an audience of 45 people on this channel currently. So it's like, which of us is going to get more views? I wonder. And which of us is going to have more influence over what people see as an archives versus a library versus a blah blah blah. So it's that weird, like, you want to make noise, but at the same time, your noise isn't going to get heard as much as the other people. So, but that's, again, an existential crisis for another day. What's important here is that She-Ra is, telling a story about fathers and sons, and because Bo apparently has like 6 other brothers or something like that, all of whom have become historians like their fathers. It's just like, it's a long line of historians, going all the way back. And Bo is the outlier in that he wants to be a rebel leader, essentially. Which I still think is just the most adorable way of doing that storyline. It's like, no, Dad, I want to go out and I want to fight people and shoot them with bows and arrows. Why, son? Why? Because I don't think, because you could make the case, and arguably, like in most of these shows that are like sci-fi fantasy oriented, that Bright Star, the computer simulation avatar that Adora often talks to, who is basically the first one's tech, she is also would technically count as archival ish. I mean, again, it's that weird place where she just has a lot of information stored in her, but that doesn't qualify her necessarily as an archives. It's like, it's just called data hoarding. So I don't, like, what do you think?
Well, I think, isn't she named Light Hope, or am I wrong about that? I think that's,
no, you might. No,
anyway,
I don't know why I think Bright
Star.
Light Hope is actually correct. As you said it, and I'm like, oh, God.
That's okay.
I can't remember anything. I'm getting old.
But I mean, I think she's just like, I mean, isn't she just like she's like a hologram, but then she also has powers. I don't know how that works, but
she's all over the place. She does what the plot necessitates her to do. She's got memories of the old She-Ra. She's got like plans from all the old stuff. She's got a backup program that goes feral, because that's of course what every computer has. There's a TV show that I at some point wanted to talk about, but I don't at the same time, because it involves a certain disappointed Hercules actor, like Kevin Sorbo, who's a right-wing nut job. But the TV show he was originally a part of, Andromeda, is in a similar situation where the ship, the Andromeda Ascendant, is basically a functioning relic of an old era. It's been like 300 years, and this ship is like the only functioning ship of that old era, and it has a lot of historical data and stuff like that. And I asked one of the creators of the show if she could be considered an archives, and he was a little bit like, probably not in the traditional sense, but she does have a lot of that historical data. And there are a couple of episodes in that first season, because Andromeda somehow made it to 5 seasons. I don't know how. Only 2.5 of them are good. But it, like, there's a couple of episodes in the first season where they really do talk about like records, and like how a record of an event is skewed by time, and they actually like witness the event and all that kind of stuff. But it's in a similar place where you're just kind of like, just because you have a bunch of historical data doesn't mean that you qualify or should even be called an archives. You just have a lot of data. It's what you do with it and how it's contextualized and organized and collected. That's what turns it into an archives. And there's no rhyme or reason to that. So we might want to table Light Hope as an archives in this sense. So but she's badass when she wants to be. So I'll give her that. All right, your turn. Next one.
I think
oh no, the pressure.
the other one, I think we I don't know how much of the Tangled series you watched.
I've seen a fair amount of it. I know the story plots for the most part, but there was a point where I kind of just dropped off of it just because I didn't know when it was on anymore. So
I mean, one of the creators of it, I don't know. He's like working for, this like right-wing media company.
That sucks.
Which is bad. But
yes,
luckily the other people who work on the show, like the writers and the I don't know, storyboarders and people, seem good.
Yay! Not as problematic.
But yeah, there's like one episode where there's like a keeper, a person who's like a keeper, and ends up being like not actually a keeper, but is like the assistant keeper, and like the keeper was like testing her the whole time. But she's not really an archivist. She's kind of like, she's kind of an archivist, but also not. She manages a museum. So I don't know. I don't know. It's like cone-shaped like spire called the Spire. I don't know.
Appropriately named, I guess.
Yes. And so she doesn't have like any training of anything. She was like a street musician that this guy just like picked up, and she has like this like library in her house.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you might as well just live in the space, like if you're going to be like attending to it, which I think like a lot of these cartoons also kind of make the case for like, well, these people have no lives, so they should just live in the facility. Like Bo's parents, his fathers, I think, live in the same area as where their museum is. So, they don't have a functioning life or anything outside of what we know about them. So who cares? But didn't you mention that there was like scrolls in trees at some point? I think one of your reviews.
That's one of the like they go into this like this old tree that was controlled by this I don't know what you want to call, like, I don't know, like an ancient sorceress or something. I don't know, something like that, called Santiri, and who becomes like a big part of the last season for various reasons. Anyway, in a lot of bad ways. But anyway, ends up manipulating someone else, and
like you do.
Yeah, so they go into like this ancient tree that was where she had her headquarters or something, and they find these scrolls that are just like a box of scrolls that are just stuck in a tree, and then there's some on the ground too. There's no archivists or no one in sight. No. Of course one of the characters starts reading one of the scrolls, and then things happen. And then of course, like, she almost dies, and the other character has to save her, and but there's no like archivist around say like, don't read that scroll, bad things are going to happen, like, don't do that. Like,
it's a bad scroll, please don't.
And the tree like collapses, and then they come back. Well, then they come back. There's like, so the characters manipulated. I don't know if you want a spoiler for that.
We're just going to go blanket spoilers for everything, basically.
So there's Rapunzel. She's the princess who gets saved, and then there's her lady in waiting, Cassandra Cass, and there's some storyboarders who said there's like some like gay vibes going on there. They didn't make that canon or anything.
Of course not.
It's Disney. It's Disney. So and also it was like confirmed that she was in this relationship with Eugene, who's like she's going to marry. So of course that like cancels out any possible
Yeah,
like
she couldn't be bisexual or
gayness.
anything. Yeah,
So
whatever.
nope. So she gets like manipulated, of course, because she feels like Rapunzel isn't paying attention to her and is kind of treating her as like the second fiddle and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So she's like controls these like black rocks and tries to like take over and all of that.
As you do. I mean, that's just the
So
normal like villain arc.
so like the very end of one episode, they go back to this tree where there's all these scrolls, and she's looking for like these fragments of the scrolls, and they just kind of look at them and then they just leave. They don't do anything about the scrolls, don't reorganize them or nothing. It's like, oh, we didn't find what we're looking for. Okay, now we have to like terrorize and take over the kingdom or whatever. Like
Moving on.
yeah. So yeah, she's struggling with like, I don't know, trauma, PTSD like the whole time. But yeah, like, that's a whole other thing. Like
yeah, you start like that's always like kind of the curse of these episodes that have like some archives management or information, libraries, whatever, is that they're kind of like plopped in the center of stories, especially in like the more modern cartoons or whatever, where it's like, okay, this might be kind of a bottle episode, but it's also kind of connected to some other stuff. So how do we talk about this without spoiling everything? But also we want to talk about the more, you have to get into some of the nitty gritty details, or else you're just kind of like, hey, Tangled, the series had a show and there was an episode and you should watch it maybe. But yeah, I always find that also hard when I'm writing a review of an episode, because it's like, okay, for context, you need this.
Right.
And then when we start talking about it, you're also going to need some other context. So now I feel like I'm just doing a summary of the entire show. Right. And do you run into that a lot when you're doing yours?
Yeah, sometimes. I don't know.
Yeah.
I end up like the first part will be like summary, and then like the last part will be like all the things that, I don't know, connecting to concepts. Other, I don't know, that's one way to do it. You could also like interlace it. I don't.
There's more than one way to write a review.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so anything else you want to talk about with Tangled?
There was that one where they, of course, went with the trope that, like, of course, to make the injury even worse, and like, oh, of course, these two women aren't going to get together. We're going to assume that they're sisters, even though they're not. But anyway, because the one person there's just, I won't get into that, but yeah, there's a whole. But in that episode, there's like they go into this cave, of course, and there's all these mirrors that like save memories that you can like look in and see memories. And of course, the evil witch that's manipulating Cass like breaks off a part of the mirrors, then thinks like, oh no, Rapunzel did this thing to me. And it's like, no, that record was manipulated. Like that record was manipulated to make you think that. So then you would continue like being her like servant or something. So
don't you love it when like even in realms of magic, like records are like so easily manipulated, like even it seems like more so than the paper stuff. It's just like, oh well, all these memories are saved in this mirror, except when this wizard got a hold of it and somehow erased half of it to make it look conveniently like Rapunzel hates you or something like that. It's like, does no one have like the ability to correct those? Like that's always my thing about like when something is like magically manipulated. Like if you're like amongst wizards and magic wielders and everything, like you have access to them, why not bring one or two of them in and be like, hey, has this been messed with magically? Please tell me. No one thinks about that part. Like that's my hot take on magic realms and record keeping. They manipulate any other memories in those mirrors?
Not really.
Just the ones about Rapunzel.
I think just that one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Gotta keep them down the path. the only way.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. What are we doing on time here? I think probably about another 20 minutes, so we can get a couple more in, or a few more. I want to do, let's do Scooby-Doo.
Okay.
What's new? No, it's not what's new. Be Cool Scooby-Doo. There have been so many Scooby-Doo cartoons in my lifetime. Remembering all of them is difficult. But this is the most recent incarnation of of Scooby-Doo, I believe, in terms of like an actual like series. And it for me, it was really weird watching it because it looks like it was animated by the same people who do Family Guy, just in the style. The humor is very different because it's not the same writers, obviously, but the animation is so similar to Family Guy that I was really worried for a second. I was like, oh no, did Seth MacFarlane's team get a hold of Scooby-Doo and this is what's happening? It's like, dear God. I mean, from what I've heard, he's done really good by the Star Trek community with the Orville. But yeah, like we've got some not so great Family Guy experiences. So yeah, just in terms of like the just the trying to get past one thing, it's like the animation style. Be like, okay, once you're past that, it's perfectly fine. But there's an episode called Silver Scream, which takes place on a movie studio lot. And I guess one of the conceits of this version of the Scooby-Doo gang is that Daphne has a thing that she does every episode. So she'll be on roller skates for the entire episode in one, or she'll be, talking with a British accent in the next one. Something like she'll have a thing she does per episode. And in this episode, she becomes the tour guide for this movie studio that they are, for reasons, touring because there's a ghost that's haunting the studio after an old film reel is discovered by the archivist, which they actually I give them kudos. The film archives that they go to is not in a basement. It's on the second floor of a building. There's obvious kind of more accurate storage happening, except for there'd probably be more like air conditioned storing, especially for older films, because the film in question is supposed to be from like I want to say like a Charlie Chaplin-esque like 1920s kind of comedy. And then the archivist himself is a young guy, youngish, like he looks like Kevin Smith from the Mallrats and Dogma and Clerks and everything. So he looks like Silent Bob basically became a film archivist. And I don't know how much of that was intentional, but just to me, I saw him and I'm like, you look like a reference to a person. But he's still in like the younger category, because we also find this a lot with representation of archivists, especially in live action media. And for the most part, cartoons are a little harder because ages are not totally obvious. And then a lot of these take place in other worlds. So the age of an alien or an anthropomorphized duck or something like that is kind of questionable. But in terms of this particular film archivist, he's fairly young. I would say he's maybe in his late 20s, early 30s, if I was going to go by that. Don't quote me on it, but that's where my mind goes. So he's the one who found and has restored the movie, but then he keeps thinking he's being haunted by the ghost of this former actor. And he's kind of gone paranoid. He's gone a bit nutso. He's got a cardboard cutout of the main star, whose name is Archie, and he's tied up the cardboard cutout as if it's gonna not do anything. Like he thinks that it's manifesting. And it's Scooby-Doo, so we always know that there's no actual ghost, and he's just been manipulated by other people in the film studio. But it was a really it was coincidental I even came across this episode. I was flipping channels looking for something to show my nephew because he was a bit younger when I found this, and it was just this was the episode I stopped on, and I was like, there's an archives in this. Because Daphne and Fred go to the archives, and they're standing out the door and it says film archives, And Daphne's like, and here's the archives where people do things, because she doesn't know. It's like, you know what, fair play. She doesn't know, so she wouldn't even hazard to guess what archiving is or what happens. But they get summarily, threatened by the young archivist who's paranoid, and he's got a baseball bat, and he's like, yeah, hilarity ensues. It's for all intents and purposes a really fun episode. I enjoyed it. Had you ever seen this particular version of Scooby-Doo or this episode or anything like that?
I haven't, but of course I read your review of it.
It's a cute episode, and it actually sometimes it makes me sad that I missed out on a show, like didn't see it when it was coming out or whatever. But it's the beauty sometimes of cartoons is that they're always accessible somewhere.
Yeah.
Other than that, I got nothing else. A lot of these are going to be real quick. So it's your turn. You pick.
Well, there's one that I just rewatched recently, except for the two ending ones. It's an anime from the I want to say 2013, 2014. Anyway, okay. It's called Gargantia on the Verdurous planet. I don't know. I just call it Gargantia for short.
Okay.
Anyway, so basically the plot is that there's this pilot who is fighting in this war against these squid octopus things. I don't know.
Right.
The plot is, but he of course gets caught in there's this battle, and they don't do so well, and a lot of them get killed, and of course they're trying to retreat, and he gets caught in this wormhole, and then he ends up in some ship or something. He doesn't really know where he is. And then he wakes up and finds himself in this interconnected community of ships that are interlocking ships that's floating. It's kind of they say it's kind of like Waterworld. Waterworld. Anyway, it's kind of like that, but anime version, but probably better than the movie.
I would say it would be a real low bar, but you could definitely exceed yes. Waterworld.
Yeah. So there's this one episode where he's convinced that he sees these squid, and he's like, oh, they're the same type of squid that attacked me in space or something, and people keep telling him don't kill them, don't do that. Of course he doesn't listen to them anyway. So he ends up killing a whole bunch of them, and then basically a genocide. So he ends up doing that, and then he ends up getting into this base or this facility they have, and he finds this record, and he gets to it, and so he's in this mecha robot type thing, and it tells him well, we can't show this to you because it's classified. He's like, I don't care about that, I want this to be declassified, I'm the highest ranking officer here, so you better declassify this anyway.
Oh my god.
So they end up declassifying. He basically shows him this tape, and then it turns out that these squid things are actually descendants of humans.
Oh god.
So that ends up he gets this total crisis, moral crisis, what have I done, what is going on? So that record sort of pushes him in this other direction than he would have been going before. So that's sort of so there's no real archives per se, because the records are just kind of strewn across the there's just this room that just falls of these files just happen to be there, which doesn't really make as much sense, but are they trying to hide them or something? And if they were hiding them, why are the records still classified? You can't access them, and yet they're this is underwater. So that part doesn't really make any sense. But I thought that it's still interesting that he's demanding these things be declassified, and you better do this or else. And
it's your modern day FOIA request or Freedom of Information Act request. Well, that's cool. I'm glad a record could like send a man down a death spiral of killing descendants of humans.
I mean, he ends up like, like eventually the robot sacrifices himself and all of that. And there's like this big battle with this other person he thinks was alive but wasn't alive. And there's a whole like, this like an evil robot basically is trying to like kill all these other humans, and he's like, don't do that. Like those people.
You're describing a typical anime. Yep.
Like those people are my friends. Like I don't want you to like kill them, and so. And of course, there's some romance involved too.
Well, yeah. I mean, again, you've basically just described an anime, so insert whatever here.
Yeah. And then there's also like this old wise man who's like a librarian, sort of. He has like a library, but he also doesn't have much information in it. I don't know, because apparently a lot of stuff was lost. So there's a record loss and data loss is a big thing too.
Yeah.
And also that they're like lying to all these recruits and like telling them that like this is the case, even though he finds out later that like, oh yeah, all the people like the upper management, they all knew that like all these people were part human, but they just didn't tell anyone. He's like, wait, what? Like, oh, they all knew. Yep.
Oh, well, as you get more into that stuff, it starts hitting home real hard, where it's just like, manipulation of records and knowledge, and how you can get people to do a lot of bad stuff by just withholding certain facts. I mean, it was the same example in the Tangled show. You withhold enough information and someone just puts the dots together in a different way, and then suddenly, oh no, you have a villain.
Yep.
But hopefully they'll be redeemed by the end. Yeah, they will.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert, they're redeemed.
Even Cass and Tangled, she's sort of redeemed. I don't know. There's a whole like I don't know. The last season is kind of shorter than the others. And I don't know. There's a whole like issue of I don't know.
Yeah, there's a whole Disney's really really great, and by great I mean awful at giving shows a proper send-off. As we've seen with the Owl House. At least Amphibia got to finish. So
right.
Okay. Well, I feel like we're coming to the end. So I want to talk about one show in particular, because it's my favorite in terms of actually showcasing an archivist, which I foreshadowed earlier, and making them interesting and part of the plot, even if it's only for an episode. And that would be DuckTales. The most recent version of it, which I think ended like a couple years ago. But in this reimagining of DuckTales, we have the episode The Great Dime Chase, in which Dewey and Webby go to the McDuck archive / library to find information on Dewey's mom, Della Duck. Because there's a whole in this version of the show, they actually really explore the triplets' mother and their connection to her, and make her like a much bigger character. And she's awesome. I will say this right now. And she's voiced by Paget Brewster. And if you don't know who that is, I don't want to know you. But yeah, so I mean, the whole entire voice cast of DuckTales is amazing. And they brought back Darkwing Duck, and it was I was happy as a Disney afternoon kid. It hit all the good parts in my brain. So anyway, they go to the McDuck family archives, and the archivist present there is Emily Quackfaster, who actually has a long history within the DuckTales comics, or the Scrooge comics, and then with the original cartoon series from the 80s and 90s. And she's had different names too. She was called Miss Tightfast in the comics. She was called Mrs. Featherby in the original cartoon. And here she's Emily Quackfaster. And she's voiced by, I think it's Susanna Blakesley, something like that. And it's just amazing, because she finds out that Dewey is Scrooge's nephew. And then she's like, oh, then you must be on an epic quest. And so she basically forces Dewey and Webby to perform like tasks to find the information about his mom, but she's really just making them do her job. And she's like chasing them on a cart of books, because again, this does mix the library archives idea, because she is called an archivist. The area where that they go to is both a library and an archives, but most of what she's doing seems to be more librarian oriented, because she's like putting books away and like only exclusively books. Like there's no like bound records or anything like that. It's just all books. But she's getting them, they're chasing her around and they're putting books back on shelves, and they even just like kind of stop in the middle of this and they're like, are you just making us do your job? And she's like, sort of. Like, at least she copped to it. Most people wouldn't. They'd be like, no, this is part of the bequest. And then at one point she threatens them with a sword. I mean, she wasn't going to kill them or anything. It's just part of the idealized quest of the great hero. But it's like, it's such a good episode because they do find the information. She gets them to like earn it, or basically. But at the same time, you have a character who is an archivist who, like, even despite the fact that she's getting the children to do her job for her, she's also teaching them something, and she's interesting. She has a personality that's beyond like, I'm just like here for the sake of the plot. It's like, no, she's actually like over the top theatrically, which is what most of the characters are in this version of DuckTales. But it's like she has a name, she has a personality. It seems like she might even have a life outside of the McDuck family archives. So I feel like she's like one of the best representations of an archivist in any of the cartoons we've so far covered, which is sad on one level.
Yeah, I mean, even the so-called keeper in like Tangled is like not Callipoli. That's a whole other, but she's not like, she's kind of like a she's kind of like a jerk. I don't know, she's kind of like a jerk to them, and then I don't know. So like,
yeah, like archivist characters, even like when they are featured, even outside of animation, are often like obstacles to protagonists. They're either present and an obstacle, or they're not present, because again, that goes back to that active protagonist thing. So like half the time when you see an archivist, you can only hope that, first of all, they even have a name or a personality beyond the jerk that won't give the hero what they want. I mean, like librarians, I think, run into this too, because you have the librarian stereotype of just being like the shusher, or the person that's just kind of like impeding them in some way. But then there's also an aspect of them that's like a knowledge keeper who leads them to the thing that they need. So librarians can get kind of both aspects, but one is more positive and one's more negative. Whereas in the archives, it feels like both are negatives, because positive portrayal of archivists are so rare.
yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah. So Emily is like the best win we have currently. And she's also not like she's not like matronly either. Like a lot of that, the stereotypes will also fall back on old like librarian stereotypes of the matronly or the old man archivist. Archivists are often more featured as men than they are as women, which just gets into the gender politics of archives, which we won't be getting into here, but it exists. Yep. But Emily, the way she's depicted, doesn't, like, again, because she's an anthropomorphized duck, age is difficult to, but from the look of her, she's probably like on the older scale, but she's still lively, and it's kind of like Scrooge. Scrooge is an older duck, but he's also very lively and energetic. So Emily kind of falls into a similar category. Like, I couldn't for the life of me tell you how old she is. I don't personally care. All I know is that she has more going for her than literally any other archivist I've seen. So I feel like she should be our mascot. And it should be that picture of her with the sword. Because that's what all archivists are like. Did you ever watch the new DuckTales?
I didn't, but I may some point. I have a bunch of shows on.
Oh
'Cause I
yeah.
have like a bazillion streaming channels now that I should just.
Yeah. I have the same problem where it's like there's a lot of things I need to watch and things that I want to watch that are wholly like separate from like website or reviews or anything like that. But it's just like, where do I have the time? And then there's so many streaming platforms that these are all spread out over. It's just like, oh, I'm not made of
Yeah.
money. Okay, well, I feel like that's a good place to stop because there's a lot of cartoons. It's a lot of things that people should be going out and enjoying. There's definitely more, so we could always come back to this at a later date. There will be more
Yep.
cartoons that will obviously
Of
come
course.
out at some point. So before we go, Berkeley, where might people find you in the midst of this Twitter breakdown that we are seeing and all of academia? What are the more likely places people are going to find you?
Well, I mean, of course, I'm on Twitter. History _Hermann, 2 N's.
I'll link all this stuff in the description.
Yeah. There's my WordPress blog, which is called archivirep.wordpress.com, also called Wading Through the Cultural Stacks. Yeah. And also on Tumblr too. That's a recent development.
Nice.
Yeah, response has been okay, but I didn't really expect much from
Tumblr's Tumblr. It's
yeah. I just wanted to repost.
Mhm.
No, why not? So
Spread it out as much as you can.
I also have an Instagram too, which is also History Hermann. I don't really post on there that much, like every couple days maybe.
That's more than I post
so,
on most things, quite frankly.
I mean, sometimes I forget. I'm like, oh, it's been 5 days. Oops, she goes, I should post something. So those places mainly, I think. I mean, I have a YouTube channel too, but I haven't uploaded things on there in a really long time. So I could.
So everyone go search for it and find it. And force them to make videos. Yeah, you can find me still on Twitter, not backing down yet, at darling_Sammy. I made a Mastodon, which is at Pop Archives, at mastodon.world, I believe. I'll link this stuff as well. So if I forget, that's on me because there's a lot to remember now. I also did Hive. I'm trying Hive out at Pop Archives because I'm also terrible at branding myself and I'm just whatever works. So I'm going to try to post more on those two if I can remember, because again, I can't be bothered sometimes and I forget. And I'm also socially, like, my social anxiety just amps itself up half the time. But if you like this video, please like it and like the channel, subscribe to the channel. This might be the best way at this point for things to start getting out, other than the website. But go to poparchives.com. It's pop-archives.com. Then there's, and if you have a suggestion for something that hasn't been talked about or something to put on the radar, you can always leave a comment, or you can email me at popculturearchives@gmail.com. And I promise I will actually look at it because again, I am not good at this, but I will make more of an effort in the coming new year, perhaps. That'll be my resolution. But yeah, on behalf of Pop Archives, thank you, Berkeley, for coming on the show. It's a long time coming. Glad we did it though. So
sure.
Yeah, and you'll definitely be back. We'll talk more cartoons at some point. So
there's so many.
There's just so many. We haven't even really like touched on anime. I mean, you just brought up the one. There's a whole bunch of other ones we could probably be talking about.
Oh yeah, there's a whole bunch. Yeah.
That's a whole other category in of itself. And on that note, bye everyone.